Hello, y'all. My name is Ann Phelps, and I am so grateful to be doing this Facebook Live from my home in Jackson, Mississippi, as I am so lucky to be doing an artist residency for the Hive and for a little bit of a period here in this season of life. We've had a couple of technical difficulties, so we are. I think we're back in business. We've frozen up a couple of times, so hopefully third time's charm, and we're gonna hopefully get this internet to work for us. I tried to strategically sit in the part of the house that has the strongest signal, so hopefully this should do the trick for us. As I've been discussing on the podcast and in these previous attempts at getting the Facebook Live video to work, I am exploring some concepts through a children's book. That's the Artist in Residence project that I'm working on, and it's a story called The Chapel and the Well that I first encountered as the introduction to Frederica Harris Tomset's book, We Are All Theologians. It's a story that really struck me, and I was in a phase of life with a 1-year-old doing lots of bedtime stories and rhyming hop-on-pop kinds of books that are great, but you kind of know the plot once you've read them one time. So my hope was that we could somehow create a children's book that was both that meditative rhyming meter that small babies really do seem to appreciate, especially at bedtime, while having content that was sort of worth contemplating and worth thinking about over and over again as adults. And so as this story was something that I felt like I could contemplate over and over again endlessly, I was struck and had the opportunity to set it to rhymed verse. And part of that text is on the Hive website, but not all of it. And so I thought that before exploring some of the visual images and things like that, we could go through and read the entirety of the text, and hopefully that could be a meaningful opportunity and a great way to jump off how we can talk through what this project is about. Again, none of this is real formal. It's just some like torn apart pages that my kid has colored on. Not a formal text worth publishing at all. Things are real low key around here. So I'll start out just by jumping in with this copy of the text, and hopefully then we can make it available to folks who'd like to read along with it sometime. And so I'll start now. An empty horizon, no hills and no trees. Even from a great distance, a person could see. Each movement that passed, every sound could be heard, home only to creatures who didn't use words. Until a young pilgrim stepped onto the scene, the view made her nervous. Should eyes even see? So far that they can't tell where earth comes to end, and heavens begin, and beyond it, what then? Like all wildernesses, it called to be crossed. With no map, no water, would she soon be lost? Standing still, looking out, she asked sky and land, but how can I do it? And with open hands, she listened. Then holding her breath, standing perfectly still, she heard a small voice babbling nonsense until she took a few steps toward the beautiful sound, the song of a spring rising up from the ground. She ran that direction, stopped to hear the sweet song, then toward it again, stop and start all along. It could have been minutes or hours or days, till she found it, drank deeply, and knelt down to pray. She saw her reflection, no longer so young, and she knew that others on journeys would come. They too would need life-giving water and rest. So she thought, I'd stay here and help in their quest. She gathered up stones and built up a tower that others could see from the distance for hours. She sang of the water that could save their lives. After hours or days or years, they arrived. From pilgrim to pilgrim, the story was told of life-giving water so clear and so cold that sustained as they sought to cross on their own. Just listen and watch for the tower of stone. Soon some would bring with them some mortar and rocks to help build the tower, and around it a box to shelter the weary and weak for a while, and some liked to build it, and build it with style. Our old pilgrim friend saw the people around her and realized she now could leave her stone tower. With years behind her, she was no longer young. She left on her journey toward the setting sun. Still year after year the stone chapel grew, and the spring of cold water looked small to the new builders and pilgrims there to see the great walls, and some didn't care about water at all. Soon after mere years, or some generations, a young builder worried about the foundations. This water might damage the site on the plain, built by strong, caring hands. Wouldn't that be a shame? And so he searched on, high and low, for something to stop up the water and plug up the spring. It's dangerous. Water is meant to be quelled, he thought, as he cut off the life-giving well. Over years or mere minutes, the crowds got smaller. The vines on the towers grew up ever taller. The wind and the rain chipped away at the stone, and soon the young builder was old and alone. What happened, he wondered, among the sad piles, and pondered and anguished and mourned a great while, till he heard a strong knock at the outside gate, where he met a young pilgrim as the hour grew late. Can I help you? He asked as he looked in her eyes. I'm so thirsty, she pleaded, too tired to cry. I heard of a legend from days long since past, of a spring of clear water to help pilgrims last. He recalled the spring that threatened the chapel and struggled inside with big questions he grappled. What was at stake if he opened the well? What if he did and the whole tower fell? But if he did not, he soon realized, as he looked in the thirsty young pilgrim's eyes, then soon she would perish, and others as well. So he led her to where the waters were quelled. Together they moved the great stone from the ground, and the waters rushed forth with a bright, lively sound that others could hear all across the vast land. So they ran to the chapel in great thirsty bands. The well was restored, along with it the crowds, and though the old builder still harbored some doubts, it soon became clear that the chapel and what I want to do is sort of explore some of the themes as I look at the images that I am in the process, slowly, painstakingly, slowly working toward illustrating this text. So the story opens an empty horizon, no hills and no trees. And that is the original story is set in the desert as I encountered it, but I'm someone who grew up in rural Nebraska in the middle of the plains, and I have learned over time that I think our spirituality is really shaped by the landscapes that we're in. And so for me, that open, vast space is deeply significant. Something's dinging at me, so I don't know what that means. Anyway, that empty space is deeply familiar for me, and it is the space where it is actually easiest for me to encounter God. Many people see places like Nebraska and think it's really boring, and they're right. To drive across it for 12 hours is super boring, but in that openness, that very openness, the sky sort of becomes its own character. And so I really start with images like this one where there's no clear horizon. And that's one of the things I think is most striking about the Nebraska landscape. So you can see here what I've got, the ground is obviously the green. And the next lines go, each movement that passed, every sound could be heard, home only to creatures who didn't use words. And that seems like an odd way to describe animals, to say that there are no people there. But for many people who are students of theology, they'll recognize that idea that in the beginning was the word, first of all. So in this word-based theology that often we talk about, and in the history of humanity, words and the development of language is really when our species' brains started to evolve in ways that set us apart and gave rise to that self-awareness and consciousness that theologians have different names for, some of them very complicated, like Ronner's supernatural, existential, but that role of language is really what makes humans humans, and makes us able to connect with each other in different ways. According to some theologies, of course, there are some biologies and zoologies that might challenge some of that in recent years, but that's the notion that I'm exploring here, is that the use of words is very central to humanity. So here's the image of the landscape with just the animals, and that is the opening scene, which brings us to the second page, which says, until a young pilgrim stepped onto the scene. I'm going to pause real quick and just make sure that things are going well here. Okay, I think so. All right. So the second image is this image of just, that you still see the birds in the background. You can tell it's the same sort of space because of the same configuration of rocks that I've got here on this side of this page, and then this side you're kind of moving forward, and the dawn is breaking, and a pilgrim steps onto there and says exactly what I was just talking about, that you can't see the end of the horizon. You can't see where earth comes to end and heaven begins. And that, I think, is a really rich theological idea as well, that in an incarnational theology, that earth and heaven are not separate, that matter matters, and that the divine is infused on this planet here and now. And she begins to ask questions, and it says, in all wildernesses it's called to be crossed. And that's a line actually from the original text where I encountered this story. And it's a really that's one that really jumped out at me, and so I really wanted to include it in the text. That for some people, I don't think this is true for all people, but for some people, when you see a wilderness, when you see an emptiness, when you see a big blank void, whether metaphorical or literal, you have to run at it. Other people run away from it. But I think there are some of us, many of us, who probably are inclined to do things like be a part of the Hive. We run at those big questions. And so I hope that this text resonates with those kinds of spirits. At the end of this stanza, I say, but how can I do it? And with open hands. And this is the one place that I break from the rhythm that's set. And it's really to sort of reorient the reader, but also to introduce that, even in these patterns, that there are going to be break points and something that pulls us out of ourselves. And that hopefully sort of gestures toward a radical inbreaking, right? A presence of the divine that's suddenly there. As she listens, there's something else going on. And so I want that listening piece to really stand out. So I broke from the meter there on purpose. And I have her, then rushing to the spring and away from the spring, and unable to, she hears this, babbling brook, and knows it's water, and knows she's going to need it in order to make it on this journey. And so she's stopping and starting, and that, I think, is really central to my understanding of pilgrimage and the journeys that we're on, especially this process, which has definitely been one of stopping and starting, that we don't usually take things sort of in one fell swoop, but we have to stop and start a lot. And she finds the water, and then I say toward the end, it could have been minutes or hours or days. And that's something I really play with in this whole text, is the notion of time. Another point I say, after some years or some generations. So we don't know, right? We don't know if this is a millennia long process. We don't know if this is, a few days in the life of one person. Hello, we're back again. I see some folks. So again, sorry for the coughing and the plague that's going around our house. So for those who are back, I think we're just gonna have a video series. As this internet keeps cutting me off, I'm gonna jump back on and we'll keep on going. Talking through, these different stanzas and what I'm doing. So as she, after some minutes or hours or days, we don't know how long, we don't know at the time, I have her finding the water and kneeling down and encountering her own reflection there, as well as that life-sustaining piece of her journey that is absolutely essential for her to make it. So that is the third illustration that is complete. The rest of what I've got here that I'll show you, and then we'll return to talking about the text, are just the landscapes as the time of day moves forward. This one would be sort of noon-ish, and then we move sort of into an evening, late afternoon, move into a sunset kind of vibe, and then a real dusky, darker one, and then we find ourselves, in the night sky here, and then we're back, toward a early morning pre-dawn that's similar to the image we saw here that's been, we started with. So we're beginning the cycles, and these are going to be the different layouts of the text. But I really want that idea of time. You can tell time is progressing, but you can't tell how long, and that that sort of central theme. And all of these, of course, continue to be set in a setting that's so similar to my own background growing up on the great American plains, the prairie, where the sky is a character of its own. And so that sky and that openness and that empty horizon that you just can't even tell where the end of the world is and where the beginning of the sky is so central. Thanks, y'all, for your wonderful comments there. Very fun going for a couple more of these, and then hopefully we'll get to all the text. So what I just finished doing was exploring these different images, different paintings. This is sort of the final one, again, of this sort of very sparse, open, prairie-like landscape. And we were talking through the text about sort of the playing with time and playing with space and sort of this almost fantastical imagination that is time frames, sort of the extremes here, right? The night and the day, but sort of in the same place. We keep the landscape in the same place, but the time moves forward as far as backdrops go. And, you know, that painting process has been a really difficult one for space, right? I definitely don't have an art studio, and a lot of painting stuff is not that easily accessible and not that great to have around when you have two small children in your house. But it's been, you know, really a meaningful meditative process to be able to think back to my own sort of place of origin and ponder what that landscape has meant to me and my own spirituality, while having some time to sit still while the kids are at daycare and do something contemplative, which has really been a powerful thing. Also reclaiming my art major from college that I never used. So it's been really, really cool to get to do that. You know, exploring this story with these images, there are a number of themes that, as I did the reading, I think are just sort of worth highlighting. I mean, obviously the largest metaphor of the text is this tension between the water, this life-giving water, and the chapel, which neither one is bad, both are good. And that was one of the things I really wanted to emphasize, was that the water is obviously essential, and the reason for the chapel, the reason for the building, the reason for the community is that it has been built up around this life-giving water, right? The life-giving water of the Holy Spirit, if you will. That's what it largely symbolizes for me. But it can symbolize a lot of different things, and a lot of people have different names for God. But that spirit that we need in order to do any kind of spiritual journeying. And the intention, right? When one encounters that spirit, one wants to share it and knows that other people need it in order to be their best self. And so they build this chapel, right? They say they build up a tower and around it a box to shelter the weary and weak for a while. So their goal, right, is that these other pilgrims are coming through and have encountered this water, but they're tired. They're on a pilgrimage. They're exhausted. They need a safe place to rest. They need, and the tower, right, is to make the water visible. The pilgrim that we encounter first listens and has to do that radical act of listening, but hopes that with building a tower, other pilgrims won't just stumble upon it, but might be able to find it on this empty plain more easily. And this is what we do in religion, right? We build up these monuments to help say, here is a place where one can encounter God on purpose, and where we are all here and want to facilitate that. But of course, as the text continues, people grow to love that chapel and the box and the tower, and they should, right? It's their creation. It's beautiful. Many of us love the things we create. I love this. I would be such a hypocrite if I didn't say I didn't. But I think that the danger comes in, right, when they grow to love the box and the tower so much that they plug up that spring because they're afraid that the water might ruin it. And my typical work is in liturgy and music. And as I visit churches, you know, there are many churches that are just not just reluctant to try new things liturgically or to try new things communally, but are terrified that if they allow the spirit that's moving in this place to move too fast or too large, that it could pull down the structure they've built all around them. And it is dangerous. The water, the spirit is dangerous. And we've seen over millennia of reformations the spirit does pull down structures when they're no longer serving their purpose. And so those who love the structure more than the water should be nervous about the water. But again, their love of the structure isn't bad so long as the water doesn't get plugged up, because without the water, the structure can't do anything. Pilgrims will stop coming because it's too far to come. They need that spirit in order for the structure to be sustained. And so that really is the guiding metaphor of the whole thing. And throughout it, there are a number of sort of smaller metaphors and themes that come in. I think that the biggest one is sort of that role of creativity, that double-edged sort of creativity, that we create something new and the spirit moves through it and it's wonderful. But it doesn't take long, right? It might have been minutes or hours or days, or after some years or some generations. We don't know how long that creative structure will stand, and those creative things become our traditions over generations. Something that we do now that's so rote and meditative, and I don't say rote in a sort of dismissive way. I mean we've done it so many times that it becomes a meditative mantra to us, was once innovative. And the things that are innovative and valuable become part of that tradition. And so I think that creative process, leaving room for that creativity while still not only having the new, having that repetition and having that tradition there, I think allows us to go deeper, while acknowledging that for so many people, that repetition can start to feel stifling and can cut off the spirit. But it is a tension, and it is not a simple one. And which is why, when the pilgrims come through and they pull out the plug, and the water rushes forth, the builder is still nervous, even though the water can suddenly nourish all these new pilgrims and the community continues to grow. It is an unnerving thing, right? When we try something new in our worship service, or a new theology challenges everything we thought we knew about the gospel, it is absolutely terrifying. I think I used to be the director of mission at a cathedral, and I would lead a workshop on the difficult word mission, right? The rug got pulled out from under us as a tradition. Everything we thought we knew about mission in the last 100 years has completely altered, right? So what that looks like is that the mission of the church for a while was interpreted as a sort of conquering of the heathens, right? Moving to foreign lands, telling people about the gospel, and the gospel was interpreted as, how can we convince people to look like us, act like us, think like us, so that they can be as happy as we are in our privileged place, right? We now know through all kinds of new lenses, mostly through listening to those very people, that's a really dangerous colonialist way to do mission. And so that's really hard for those missionaries and missionary families who have done that hard work for many years, and many of them found great meaning and built great relationships. That's a hard thing to challenge. But I think it's really vital that we do, if we're going to continue to grow in the spirit and continue to not be this sort of elitist, hierarchical, patriarchal tradition that is stifling the sort of grassroots loving spirit that we need in the world right now. So sorry, that's my sort of heady, off the cuff explanation of an example of one of these structures that has in fact come crashing down as people have listened to the spirit in ways that was hard for many people, but I think the only way to give life to the church in this new season. And I think we're seeing that, whether it be liturgically, theologically, I think we're seeing that now, especially around conversations about privilege and otherness. And I think that there are some really hard conversations going on that are definitely can feel really scary and like they're crashing down around people. And, if we welcome these new voices and new faces into our church, if we let the spirit move, that it'll change us and our traditions will go away. And that is really threatening. But if we don't welcome those people fully, then are we who we say we are? And that's really the question at the center of this. As the text concludes, and I didn't get to this one on the first video as I was reading the text, so I'll read the ending again, where I say, The well was restored along with the crowds, and though the old builder still harbored some doubts, it soon became clear that the chapel and tower depended upon the water's great power. Yes, over and over this story unfolds as builders and pilgrims, some young and some old, will limit or stifle the life giving spring, though it is the true source of everything. Though its strength can frighten the strong or the lost, without it the wilderness cannot be crossed. Its soft song will guide you if that is your will. Just listen in love for the voice small and still. So throughout the text, I try to use some familiar terms, some familiar images that can orient readers who are inclined toward organized religion to understand some of the scriptural basis for what I'm exploring and the historical basis especially, without sort of beating people over the head with God talk that is not useful for all people, especially in my generation, our generation, as I look at some of the ages of folks that are on right now. I think that ambiguity is really useful. Along the lines of ambiguity, I also try to do that, with the images of the pilgrim itself. I don't want the pilgrim to look like me, right? It's sort of gender ambiguous. Of course, I use she pronouns at the beginning, but ethnically ambiguous, racially ambiguous, culturally ambiguous. That is the goal, right? That whoever the listener, whatever the age, whatever the person's orientation in any way, can find themselves in this pilgrim or in the builder. I have a friend, one of the friends I first read this to, who said, in this story, I'm definitely the builder. And he was an Episcopal priest who I was dear friends with. And I was like, well, that's true. And he and I always had a really good working relationship. But there was always that tension there. His sermons were never quite prophetic enough for me. And my sermons were always a little edgy for him. So it's good. It's good to have both the builders and the pilgrims in this world. We need all of that in our church leadership and in our laity as well. So, and I am laity, for those who don't know. I'm not ordained. I've sort of resisted the ordination train all the way till now. So I'm going to hopefully be able to keep doing that. But it's been a really meaningful process to explore these things through image and through poetry and through the eyes of children. That said, there have been some serious challenges, not just time-wise. The obvious thing is, how do you have time and space in your life to do this kind of work? And it's hard. It's been years of a process for a pretty strict, what I would have done in college in a couple of weeks in a painting class has been years. But it's been challenging mostly on the nuts and bolts side. How do you get a text published? I know how to get an academic journal article published. What I just spouted off about mission, I could write that in a Word document and send it off to folks, and may or may not get chosen, but I know the process. I don't know how one publishes a children's book. And so the other day I went to like a local chapter of a children's book publishing group, and it's a whole world. Like anything you do, it's a whole world. And I feel like right now in our culture, we really value expertise and specialization. And what I heard in this group is something I've heard in a lot of other contexts, which is, very few books get published, and many people write these things and they don't know what they're doing. And, you're lucky if you even have a agent even look at it. And, for those who don't know, an agent usually looks at your text and decides whether or not to bring it to a publisher. You can't even bring it directly to a publishing company. And I know that's true, right? But I heard that as a musician my whole life growing up. I heard, unless you are going to make this your everything, like it's really hard to have a career in music and you can't do it. And so, don't even try. Find something else that's more practical. And then, I went to divinity school and I heard that about theology. My advisor said, don't get a PhD unless there's absolutely nothing else in the world you can do and be happy. And the problem with that statement is, if you're someone who can be happy doing lots of things, then you're stuck. There's nothing you can do. There's nothing you can dig into in a meaningful way. And so I'm trying to carry that message that I've learned over the years into this process, that yes, it's rare to get a children's book published. Yes, it's hard. But it was also hard to become a professional musician, and I'm doing that. And it was also hard, to get a PhD in theology. And I have lots of friends doing that, some of whom are right here, right now. And I think that I really want to carry that with me and not go down the rabbit hole of this defensiveness about one's craft and say, you know, I trust this group. I believe that they're right, that there are some things to consider, readership, audience size, that kind of thing. But to continue trying to let the spirit lead in this process and not allow those questions of publishability and, I mean, obviously I'm not doing this for financial gain, right? So I don't care how many copies sell in a sense, except that no one will publish it, if it doesn't, if it isn't going to sell. So, you know, those kinds of questions, are hard, but you know, those are the chapel. Those are the box. Those are not the water. And so, in this process, I really am trying to sort of let that life-giving water continue to guide me, and continue to listen to that still small voice, even when, you know, the voices of this world say this isn't going to work, you're wasting your time, or this is a fun little quaint project for your like mom self to do in your free time. I don't know who thinks moms have free time. They don't. But I think that, trying to allow this to guide itself, and hopefully it'll come to fruition. If not, I'll, you know, frame the pictures and put them up in my house somewhere and we'll call it a day. But I'm deeply grateful that y'all were willing to come with me on this journey and listen to me ramble. Again, this is sort of an extrovert's dilemma. I'm such an extrovert that I feel bizarre, like I'm talking to myself. But I see that you're there. I see some comments coming in, but it is a really bizarre format. I wish I could just reach out and really talk with all of you, because that's more my speed. But I'd love to hear input. I'd love to hear ideas. I would love it if anyone does know about the nuts and bolts of this kind of thing. If you would help hold my hand and guide me, because I am going in blind. And I think right now, I mean, I just need to finish the work. But and I'll take any help and guidance I can get, creatively, artistically, socially, publishing wise. I'll take it all. So I'm just so grateful for this opportunity, and for y'all, for spending some time listening to me ramble and checking out this project as it is, coming out right now, and not fully formed yet. So thank you for this non-judgmental, supportive space. I think that's it. Everybody have a great day, night, whenever you're seeing this. And I look forward to connecting again soon.